Welcome to the Codcast, sponsored today by the MBTA's new PERK program. We're talking about a bill pending on Beacon Hill, which, if approved, would directly intervene in the labor dispute between National Grid and the 1,250 steelworkers the company locked out of work in June. National Grid has raised questions about the legality of the bill, but the legislation nevertheless seems to be picking up some momentum, at least for holding a public hearing on the labor dispute at the State House. It seems clear that the fires and explosions that occurred on the natural gas network of Columbia Gas in the Merrimack Valley have become background noise in this labor dispute between Grid and the steelworkers. I'm Bruce Moll from CommonWealth Magazine, and joining me is the chief sponsor of the National Grid legislation, Representative James O'Day of Worcester. Welcome, Representative O'Day.
Good afternoon. How are you today?
Good. You filed a bill dealing with National Grid. What would that bill do?
So, you mentioned two things here a little bit today. What had gone on with the explosions. So the bill predates those explosions, and I think it's important to note that. The bill that I filed goes back to the beginning of that initial and original lockout by National Grid with those.
That's now about 6 months ago, right?
Yeah, I think it actually commenced at the end of June, and I filed the bill sometime in July. And the bill having been filed by me was really done through my frustration with a national or international company walking away from the collective bargaining table during the time that they were in negotiations, and essentially saying, final and last offer, take it or we're locking you out. I just don't think that that's the way that we should be conducting business here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I'm a longtime union guy. I worked for Service Employees International Union as a social worker for the Department of Social Services for over 25 years, was a regional vice president. And I can assure you that there were many times where we didn't agree with what was going on across the table from us. But I always felt it was important that work continued to be done and negotiations continue to occur, and where the National Grid completely just, forced their workers to no longer be able to come to work, taking away their ability to earn a wage, to provide for their families, taking away from their health insurance. I just felt that was wrong, and that's part of what my particular piece of legislation goes after.
And what would it do? You mentioned some of the concerns that union workers have. What would your bill do?
So the bill does a couple of things. Well, I hope it does a couple of things. One was to continue to make certain that during the walkout that the employees still were able to have access to their health care. Secondly, that no increase in of revenues be obtained by the National Grid through work being conducted through the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, so that they're not having the opportunity to increase their sales, so to speak, while these people are not being allowed to go to work. So obviously, the piece around the health insurance piece would be something pretty new, right? That would be I don't know if it would actually be a precedent or not, but it would be new for the legislature to sort of weigh in on such an issue. But I felt so strongly about what was going on there that I thought I needed to file a bill that would at least hopefully get the attention of some of my colleagues. Certainly get the attention of National Grid and hopefully force them back. Maybe force is not a great word, but at least to get them back to the bargaining table, get people back to work, and continue to have an opportunity to resolve the remaining issues that management has with these two unions that are still now, as you mentioned, 6 months out of work.
So I don't have a knowledge of what's been done in other cases, but it does seem like this is an instance if your bill were to pass, where the legislature would be intervening, obviously, directly in a labor dispute. Is it because it's a utility, or do you think this, if any company did this?
Well, I think I would have to sort of speak to that from my own opinion. All right, I think you're right. I don't think that with other companies that the legislature has sort of waded into that kind of a fight. But certainly where it is a utility, I think it gives it a little higher priority, if you would, because of the risk of just making sure that work that's being done out there is being done by qualified individuals. And I will speak to the fact that as I walked in here today, we both agreed it's cold out.
Right.
And so, this whole idea of this utility, making certain that we're able to get, and again, the bill predates the issues, and unfortunately, individuals, families up there in the Merrimack Valley are still dealing with the loss of heat, the loss of natural gas coming into their home. So I think you can draw a conclusion that, because of those important issues, it does give it a little higher level of importance where the legislature, again, I'm hoping that the parties come together, go back to the bargaining table, and resolve it. But that's not happening, and so maybe it is a matter that the legislature, and again, we don't do this lightly at all, that we may need to be involved.
Now, National Grid, in fact, their Massachusetts president, came on our podcast, I don't know, several weeks ago, and she said they do want to negotiate with the union. They did lock the union out, doing all the things you mentioned, but they do want to negotiate with the union. It does seem like both sides are sort of dug in on their respective positions right now.
Mm-hmm.
In the union, I think some might say this legislation is going to put pressure on National Grid to settle.
Bargaining is an art form, I think. Having been on a number of different bargaining at a number of different bargaining tables, I think that National Grid, the management of National Grid, had a very tight set of circumstances that they feel compelled that they have to have in order to continue to, I've spoken with both sides. I haven't spoken with, not in depth anyway, with Marcy Reed, who is the president. But, there are a number of other unions that have employees at National Grid, and National Grid is very quick to point out that all of these other unions have accepted the proposals that they were given. And in my conversation with National Grid, it's like, well, we have all these other proposals, and it wouldn't be fair to these other unions if we didn't do exactly the same thing with, the folks at 1203.
The steelworkers.
Right,
yeah.
the steelworkers. So, I'm not sure that argument holds a lot of water, as far as from my perspective, anyway. So good for National Grid, I suppose, in their negotiations with these other with these other unions. They came to an agreement, and those other unions gave up certain things, right? I'm not exactly certain what National Grid gave up in those negotiations, but for the steelworkers right now, it is important for them that new hires have a good health benefit, that new hires have a good, strong retirement benefit. It's, an injury to one is an injury to all. And so, they feel very strongly about that position. And I think, they see importance to them as a union, to their members, to their existing members, to their new members, that's an important issue for them. That, because I think one of the fears is that you have haves and have-nots, right? New people, so they can almost
Treat
be
them
looked
differently.
at
Yeah.
as a second-class citizen, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that is a really important part of what they're trying to negotiate.
And now a word from our sponsor.
Time is money. Commuting can be a pain. Save time and money and make your commute a little easier with Perk, the new Transit Pass program from the T. With Perk, you get a monthly pass that automatically renews and get savings on your taxes. Ask your employer how they can sign you up. For more info, go to perk.mbta.com. That's perk with a Q.mbta.com.
Do you feel the legislature would say, let's raise it up? Ratepayers can pay that amount. Is that you're not saying what needs to be negotiated with your bill, but you're sort of saying, you can't do any more business here until you get things back under.
Well, let's get people back to work.
Yeah.
Right. And I think I know I've read some information on the impact of what has transpired with 1,200 people out of work economically. The folks are they're earning less money weekly, obviously, from their unemployment benefits. They're not having the same opportunity of putting money into the economy that they would have been able to should they still be working. But the point that I wanted to get to, and it's always an argument that a lot of managers always seem to leave off of the argument, right? And so it's very important for National Grid's management and their stockholders to earn money, right? Mm-hmm. So how about if they earn a little less? How about if Marcy Reed earns a little less? I haven't heard any talk about what sacrifices those folks have been asked to make, if any, during any of this conversation. Rates, rolling back onto the consumers and what have you. Well, some of those rates may be able to be lowered a little bit if those in upper management take a little less money. I never seem to hear that end of the argument when we start getting into discussions around what's going on with the union, how much money the union members are making. Listen, if they weren't organized out there, National Grid would like them to work for $5 an hour, is my opinion, right? So they are organized, they're strong in their argument, they're strong in what they believe in, and I think they're willing to negotiate, but they can't do it if they're not able to continue also to support their families at the same time.
So one last thing I want to ask you, as you pointed out, you filed your bill before the disruption, the fires, explosions in the Merrimack Valley. The bill sat there for a while. Mm-hmm. The fires and explosions happened. Gas safety, pipeline safety is a pretty big issue among the public. And obviously on Beacon Hill, there's a number of hearings being scheduled to talk about it. And your bill is, while separate, focused on a separate issue, nevertheless sort of caught up in that whole issue. Are you concerned, as the union says, that this lockout could lead to problems in the National Grid territory with management and replacement workers doing a lot of these
Sure,
jobs?
I think that's been a part of the conversation since the explosion, right? Both in the Merrimack Valley and in Woburn, I think it was.
Woburn.
So, long before the explosion, I think folks have somewhat of a, underlying concern with gas lines and gas leaks, and it's volatile. That's probably too strong of a word, but we have to always, relative to public utilities, have an eye on the importance of its safety and its delivery. And I think that when we're without a number of folks who are really well trained in that, I know that the grid says that the supervisors that are out there are, they have years of experience and so on and so forth. I don't think that there's any replacement for those folks who do it day in and day out and really understand the nuances of laying pipe, of knowing what the cold weather has to do with it, and so many other aspects of being safe. So I think as winter now is fastly approaching and folks are still without the kind of reliable services that they've become accustomed to, that, I think Speaker DeLeo has done a good job recently of trying to get people to really look at what's going on, and where we're now going to have a couple of hearings, that I'm hopeful again that the continued discussion around this will wind up with a positive outcome.
And it seems like, in addition to your bill, the Speaker, the Governor, who is a Republican, have all expressed some, I wouldn't say sympathy, but some camaraderie with the union in this situation, urging them to come back, to urging the company to take them back. Do you think there's sort of broad-based support for your bill now?
I think we're going to have to wait and see how the hearings go. And I'm hoping, again, as we continue to have this attention paid to the issue, that National Grid and the unions will continue to try to get together and work on it. As I mentioned, there's some language in my bill that would be precedent-setting, right? Mm-hmm. And anytime you're filing a piece of legislation like that, let us also remember that we're in informal session now, right? I filed this bill towards the very end of our formal session. There was lots of things going on. We had 5 or 6, 7 maybe different conference committees being heard. So for this particular bill at the time it was filed to have maybe, slid a little bit off the back burner, the winter wasn't here yet, and so at that point in time, folks had only been out of work for a little while, with certainly hopes, I'm certain, that it was going to get resolved. But now here we are, several months later, winter's knocking at our door, cold weather's at our feet, and families up there in the Merrimack Valley are very, very concerned. Thanksgiving's next Thursday. Christmas is the month after that. People want to have their families in tow, in town, celebrate, feed them, keep them warm. And so with this, us also being an informal session, a lot of things would have to happen for some real movement on this bill. Not to say that it couldn't happen, because it could, given the importance of this bill. Scratch that. Not the importance so much of the bill, but the importance of what's going on right now, with still hundreds of folks locked out, winter quickly approaching, many homes in Merrimack Valley still without heat. We're hoping something will move the meter forward.
A hearing would at least draw attention to the issue.
No question about it.
Representative Day, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your interest in the bill, and certainly in your interest of hopefully we can come to some resolution with this, and let all these families that are struggling a little bit right now have a better holiday season.
Thanks.
Thank you.